The air at Quantico was thick with the smell of wet pine and diesel. It clung to the back of the throat, a permanent taste of mud and ambition. For the Marines selected for the advanced reconnaissance course, it was the smell of the proving ground. For Corporal Anya Sharma, it was just air. She stood in the formation, a head shorter than the men flanking her, her frame lean where theirs was broad, her presence quiet where theirs was boisterous. Her ILB pack, loaded to regulation 60 pounds, looked like a mismatched shell on a creature not built to carry it. The others had noticed. They always did. Whispers slithered through the ranks, sharp and condescending. "Look at that. She'll be the first one to wash out." The voice belonged to Corporal Diaz, a thick-necked Marine from El Paso with a swagger that preceded him by a good 10 feet. His audience, a pair of equally cocky lance corporals, snickered. Probably a diversity push. Gotta meet the quota. Sharma's eyes remained fixed on the gray, unforgiving facade of the primary instruction building. She heard them. She registered the words, cataloged the tone, and filed the information away. It was data, nothing more. Wasting energy on a response was inefficient. Her focus was on her gear. She mentally ran through the checklist. The precise placement of each magazine in her chest rig, the tension of the straps on her pack, the way her boots were laced to prevent hotspots on a long march. Her world was a place of meticulous order, a fortress against the chaos they saw as strength. They were dismissed to the barracks to stow their civilian effects and prep for the initial gear inspection. The long, open bay was a cacophony of clattering metal, shouted jokes, and the aggressive thump of sea bags hitting the floor. Sharma found her assigned rack at the far end, away from the main cluster of noise. She moved with an economy of motion that was almost unnerving. While others wrestled with their packs, spilling contents onto the floor, she unclipped 3 buckles and laid her equipment out on her poncho liner in a perfect, geometric display. Every item was clean, serviced, and placed with surgical precision. Diaz and his friends, Evans and Martinez, ambled over, their curiosity piqued by her silence. Diaz leaned against the neighboring rack, arms crossed over his chest. He was built like a brick shithouse and carried himself with the unearned confidence of a man who had never been truly tested. "Hey, Sharma," he said, his voice loud enough for the whole bay to hear. "You sure you're in the right place? The admin building is back toward the main gate." Sharma didn't look up. She was checking the seal on her waterproof bag. "I'm sure, Corporal." Her voice was calm, level, without a trace of the anger or defensiveness he was trying to provoke. It was like throwing a rock into a still lake. The ripples were small and vanished quickly. This seemed to irritate him more than any retort would have. "You know, this course has a 90% attrition rate," Martinez chimed in, prodding a neatly coiled rope in her layout. "Most of that's physical. We're talking 80-90-pound rucks in the mountains. For weeks." "I'm aware of the course requirements," she replied, now inspecting the edge of her K-bar. Evans, younger and more follower than leader, shifted his weight. "It's just, you're not exactly built for it, you know?" Finally, she looked up. Her eyes were a dark, steady brown. They weren't angry or fearful. They were analytical. She looked at the 3 of them, her gaze lingering for a fraction of a second on each, assessing their posture, their breathing, the way they held their weight. It was a look that saw more than they were comfortable with. "My build is sufficient," she said, and then her attention returned to her gear. The conversation terminated. They were left standing there, the wind taken out of their sails. Her complete lack of reaction was a more effective shield than any angry outburst. They couldn't find a crack in her composure. Diaz scoffed, trying to regain his footing. "Whatever. Don't come crying to us when you're ringing the bell on day 2." He and his cronies swaggered off, their laughter a little too loud, a little too forced. Sharma continued her preparations. She didn't see their mockery as a personal attack. It was a procedural challenge, a variable in a new operational environment. They were testing for weakness the way predators circle a new animal in the herd. Their mistake was in their definition of strength. They saw it in bulging biceps and loud voices. They saw power in physical imposition. They couldn't comprehend the kind of strength forged in silence, patience, and the cold, hard calculus of survival. They saw a small woman. They didn't see the weapon she had made of herself. The first test was over. She had passed by simply refusing to play. The next one, she knew, would not be so simple. The arrival of Gunnery Sergeant Rourke silenced the barracks instantly. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His presence filled the space, a gravitational force that pulled all attention toward him. He was a man carved from granite and institutional memory, with a face that looked like a map of forgotten battlefields. His eyes, pale and sharp, swept across the room, missing nothing. They paused on Sharma for a beat longer than on anyone else. It wasn't a look of curiosity. It was a look of profound, deeply ingrained skepticism. "Welcome to the Advanced Reconnaissance Course." His voice was a low growl, like stones grinding together. "Most of you will not be here in 3 weeks. You will quit. You will get injured. You will fail. This is not a place for boys who think they are men. This is a place where we forge instruments of war. An instrument must be strong. It must be resilient. It must be able to endure pressure that would turn lesser materials to dust." His gaze drifted back to Sharma. The implication was as subtle as a sledgehammer. "There is no room for weakness here. There is no special treatment. The mountain doesn't care about your feelings. The enemy doesn't care about your gender. The standard is the standard. If you cannot meet it, you will be gone. If you are a liability, you are a danger to every Marine around you. We don't carry liabilities. We cut them loose." The dismissal was absolute. He hadn't just challenged her. He had declared her a foregone conclusion, a liability waiting to happen. The other Marines stood straighter, their chests puffed out. They were the strong material. She was the flaw in the forging. The first phase of the course was a brutal physical crucible designed to weed out the weak. The first event was a 12-mile ruck march in full kit, timed. Diaz shot Sharma a venomous grin as they lined up. "Try to keep up, Princess." The horn blared. The pack of Marines surged forward, a wave of green and tan canvas. Diaz and his crew set a blistering pace, jockeying for the front. Sharma did not join them. She fell into a steady, rhythmic stride, her breathing controlled, her eyes on the terrain 10 feet ahead. Her pace was metronomic, unchanging. It was not fast. It was relentless. The first few miles were a blur of bravado. The men joked, they pushed, they competed. By mile 6, the jokes had died. The only sounds were the rhythmic crunch of boots on gravel and the labored breathing of Marines whose initial burst of energy had betrayed them. The sun beat down, turning the air into a shimmering soup. Sharma kept her pace. Her expression was neutral, her body a machine calibrated for endurance. She wasn't competing against them. She was competing against the distance, against the weight, against the heat. It was a mathematical problem, and she was solving it one step at a time. Diaz, who had been in the top 5, began to fade around mile 9. A cramp seized his calf, and his confident stride became a pained limp. Martinez had fallen back even earlier, his face pale with heat exhaustion. Evans was still pushing, but his form was sloppy, his energy draining away with every step. Sharma passed Martinez without a word. She passed Diaz a mile later. He glared at her as she went by, his face a mask of sweat and humiliation. She didn't look at him. Her focus was absolute. She crossed the finish line squarely in the middle of the pack. She wasn't the first, but she was far from the last. What was unsettling to those who watched was her recovery. While other Marines collapsed, gasping for air and tearing at their canteens, she calmly unslung her pack, sat down, and began methodically stretching her legs. Her breathing was deep, and even within a minute, she hadn't just finished. She had finished with reserves to spare. Rourke stood by the finish line, a clipboard in his hand. He watched her, his expression unreadable. He made a note next to her name. He had expected her to fail. She hadn't. This did not earn his respect. It only made him more suspicious. She was an anomaly, and anomalies were dangerous. The next week was a blur of similar trials. obstacle courses, long swims in the cold bay, forced marches in the dead of night. Sharma never won. She never came in last. She was always in the middle, a ghost in the machine who simply refused to break. Her quiet competence was more infuriating to her detractors than outright failure would have been. They couldn't mock her for quitting, so they shifted their tactics. They mocked her technique. On the rifle range, her shooting stance was unorthodox, her body angled in a way that didn't match the textbook form. "Look at her," Diaz muttered to Evans. "She holds it like it's a damn broomstick." Yet her groupings were tighter than his. In the pool, her swimming stroke was efficient but lacked the explosive power of the others. Yet she never tired. The dismissal coalesced around a single idea. She was getting by, but she lacked the raw, aggressive physicality essential to a recon Marine. She was a technician, not a warrior. It was a narrative they were comfortable with, one that kept their worldview intact. Gunnery Sergeant Rourke seemed to share it. He pushed her harder than anyone else, singling her out for the most grueling repetitions, his voice a constant, grating presence. "Faster, Sharma. Are you tired, Sharma? My grandmother can move faster than that. And she's dead." She never complained. She never broke. She just did the work, her face a blank canvas. She was saving her energy. She knew the real test, the one that couldn't be measured with a stopwatch or a scorecard, was still to come. And Rourke, in his relentless effort to break her, was about to give her the perfect opportunity to show them exactly what she was. The culmination of the initial physical phase was the hand-to-hand combat module. The air in the dojo was humid and smelled of sweat and rubber mats. The Marines, battered and bruised from the preceding weeks, circled the training area, their energy low. Gunnery Sergeant Rourke stood in the center, a monolith of controlled violence. He moved with a grace that belied his size, his presence dominating the room. "Marine Corps martial arts is more than fighting," he began, his voice echoing in the quiet space. "It is the embodiment of the warrior ethos. It teaches you to be a weapon with or without a rifle in your hands. Today we focus on counters. When an enemy has you, when you think you are finished, that is when you are most dangerous. That is when you must explode with precise, overwhelming violence." He demonstrated a rear-naked choke, a common and deadly submission hold. His volunteer was a broad-shouldered sergeant who outweighed Sharma by a good 80 pounds. Rourke locked in the choke with fluid expertise, and the sergeant tapped out in seconds. "The key is to disrupt the opponent's base before they can fully sink in the hold," Rourke explained, his eyes scanning the exhausted faces of the trainees. Then his gaze settled on Sharma. A cruel smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was the moment he had been waiting for, a public forum to expose the weakness he was so certain existed. "Corporal Sharma." Front and center. A low murmur went through the squad. Diaz smirked, folding his arms. This was going to be good. This was where her quiet endurance would fail her. Strength against strength. She didn't have a chance. Sharma moved to the center of the mat without hesitation. She stood before Rourke, her posture relaxed but ready. The physical disparity was almost comical. He was a mountain. She was a stone at its base. "Pay attention," Rourke barked at the class. "The corporal here is significantly smaller than your average opponent. This presents a challenge. The standard counters may require more strength than she can generate. We will demonstrate." It was a calculated humiliation. He wasn't teaching her. He was using her as an example of failure. "Give me your back," he commanded. Sharma turned, her eyes focused on the far wall. She controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate. She felt Rourke's massive arms encircle her neck and chest. He wasn't applying a training hold. This was different. He was putting real pressure on her, not enough to choke her out instantly, but enough to cause pain and induce panic. He was testing her composure, trying to make her flail and struggle for the entertainment of the class. "You feel that?" he grunted, his voice next to her ear. "That's control. The enemy has you. Your air is being cut off. Panic sets in. What do you do, Corporal?" The pressure increased. Her vision began to tunnel slightly. The smirks on the faces of the other Marines were the last thing she saw clearly. Diaz was practically vibrating with anticipation. She did nothing. For a full 3 seconds, she remained limp, giving him no resistance to fight against. He tightened his grip, confused by her passivity. It was in that moment of his confusion, that fractional shift in his focus, that she moved. It wasn't an explosion of strength. It was a cascade of precise, economical movements. Her left hand shot up, not to pull at his arm, but to hook 2 fingers into the soft tissue behind his jawline, digging into the mandibular nerve. An involuntary jolt of sharp, electric pain shot through Rourke's head. His choke loosened for a microsecond. It was all she needed. She dropped her body weight, sinking straight down, not away from him. This change in elevation broke his posture, forcing him to bend forward. Simultaneously, her right elbow drove backward, not into his ribs, but into the floating rib, a specific, vulnerable target. Rourke let out a sharp grunt of pain, his breath leaving him in a rush. The choke was broken, but she wasn't finished. As his arms came loose, she pivoted on her left foot, spinning inward, under his arm. She was now inside his guard, too close for him to strike effectively. Before he could recover his balance, her right foot stomped down hard on the instep of his right boot, trapping his foot to the mat. Her left hand, which had been at his jaw, slid around to the back of his neck. Her right hand found his right elbow. Using his trapped foot as a fulcrum and his own forward momentum against him, she torqued her entire body. It was a perfect application of biomechanics, a lesson in leverage over mass. Gunnery Sergeant Rourke, all 230 pounds of him, was lifted from his feet in a clean, undeniable arc. He hit the mat with a thunderous crash that shook the entire room. The air was driven from his lungs. For a moment, the world was just the impact, a flash of white behind his eyes. Sharma landed on top of him, her knee pressed firmly into his sternum, the edge of her hand resting against his throat. She wasn't breathing hard. Her expression was the same calm, analytical mask it had always been. Silence. The entire squad was frozen. Jaws were slack. Diaz's smirk had evaporated, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. They had expected her to struggle. They had expected her to fail. They had not expected her to dismantle their instructor, a man they considered a demigod of combat, with the detached efficiency of a surgeon. Rourke lay on the mat, the wind knocked out of him, staring up at the ceiling. He felt no pain from the fall, only a profound sense of shock. The technique she had used, it wasn't standard MCMAP. It was something else. Faster. More brutal. It was a system disruption, designed not just to counter, but to incapacitate and terminate. Slowly, he pushed himself up onto his elbows. Sharma moved off him instantly, stepping back and assuming a neutral stance. She did not look triumphant. She did not look proud. She looked like she had just completed a routine task. Rourke got to his feet, his face a thundercloud of conflicting emotions. Humiliation warred with a new, unwelcome flicker of something else. Respect? No, not yet. It was confusion. It was a grudging acknowledgement of a reality he had refused to see. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. He didn't see a small woman anymore. He saw a depth he couldn't fathom. He dusted himself off, his jaw tight. He turned to the stunned class. "You see that?" he rasped, his voice hoarse. "That's what happens when you underestimate an opponent." Next. He didn't speak to Sharma again for the rest of the day. But he didn't have to. The message had been sent. The ground had shifted beneath their feet. The mockery had died, replaced by a wary, uncertain silence. The takedown in the dojo bought Sharma a reprieve from the open contempt, but it did not earn her a place. It simply made her an enigma. The quiet dismissal was replaced by a suspicious quiet. They watched her now, not with derision, but with a cautious curiosity. The real test lay ahead, in the sprawling, unforgiving wilderness of the Appalachian Mountains, where the simulations were designed to feel like reality. The final field exercise was a 5-day reconnaissance and surveillance mission. 2 teams would be inserted into the George Washington National Forest, tasked with locating and observing a simulated enemy encampment. Sharma was placed on Alpha Team, led by Corporal Diaz. Gunnery Sergeant Rourke would be accompanying them as an observer and evaluator. Diaz's leadership was aggressive and by the book. He pushed the team hard from the moment their boots hit the ground. He saw the mission as another competition, a chance to reassert his dominance after the humiliation in the dojo. He set a punishing pace, ignoring the subtle signs of fatigue in his men. For the first 36 hours, the mission went according to plan. They moved through the dense, mountainous terrain, establishing a series of clandestine observation posts. Sharma was a ghost. She moved through the undergrowth with a silence that was unnatural, her footfalls barely registering. On watch, her stillness was absolute, her senses tuned to the rhythm of the forest. Then the weather turned. It started as a drizzle, but by nightfall on the second day, it had become a torrential, freezing downpour. The temperature plummeted. A thick, disorienting fog rolled down the mountainsides, reducing visibility to less than 20 feet. It was an unforecasted storm, a freak system that turned the forest into a green, dripping hell. Their high-tech gear began to fail. The encrypted radio crackled with static and then died completely. The GPS unit, soaked and battered, flickered and went dark. They were cut off, blind, and increasingly cold. This is where Diaz's rigid, textbook leadership began to crumble. His plan had relied on technology and a predictable environment. Faced with chaos, he had no answers. He made the critical error of trying to push through the storm, to stick to the original timetable. "We keep moving," he ordered, his voice tight with forced confidence. "We need to get to the pre-planned rally point." Rourke, observing, said nothing. This was part of the test. Sharma spoke for the first time in hours. "Corporal, the rally point is on the other side of that ridge. In this weather, that's a 4-hour march. The ground will be unstable. We're losing light. We should find shelter and wait it out." Diaz rounded on her, his frustration boiling over. "I'm the team leader, Sharma. We're not stopping. We follow the plan." "The plan is compromised," she stated simply. "The conditions have changed. We need to adapt." "Are you questioning my orders?" Diaz snarled. Before Sharma could reply, a scream cut through the wind. It was Martinez. He had been walking point and had slipped on a slick, moss-covered rock. There was a sickening crack. He lay at the bottom of a short, steep ravine, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. The crisis had arrived. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. Evans and the team's corpsman, Doc Chin, scrambled down to help Martinez. Diaz stood frozen for a moment, his face pale. His authority was evaporating in the freezing rain. As Chun was assessing Martinez, another disaster struck. Rourke, moving to get a better vantage point, put his weight on a loose section of earth. The ground gave way beneath him. He slid down the muddy embankment, his leg twisting and catching on an exposed tree root. He let out a low, guttural roar of pain. In the space of 30 seconds, Alpha Team had gone from a reconnaissance unit to a leaderless, isolated group of casualties. They had 2 injured men, one of them their instructor, no communications, no navigation, and were lost in a deadly storm. The simulation was over. This was now a survival situation. Fear was a tangible thing, as cold and wet as the rain itself. Evans was shivering uncontrollably, his movements clumsy. Doc Chun was overwhelmed, trying to triage 2 serious injuries at once. And Diaz was staring into the fog, his mind blank, the pages of his textbook leadership guide completely useless. This was the moment Sharma had been preparing for her entire life. While the others saw chaos, she saw a series of problems that needed to be solved in a specific order. Her mind became a calm, clear space. Emotion was a luxury she couldn't afford. She didn't shout orders. She didn't declare herself in charge. She acted. Her first move was toward Evans. "Evans," she said, her voice cutting through his shivering. "Give me your poncho." He fumbled with the straps, his fingers numb. She took it from him, her movements swift and sure. She found a rock overhang nearby, a shallow cave barely large enough for a few men. It wasn't much, but it was out of the wind and the direct rain. "Get Martinez under here," she told 2 other Marines. Carefully, she turned to Diaz. He was still standing there, shell-shocked. She didn't challenge him. She gave him a simple, direct task. "Diaz, get a fire going." Right here, she pointed to a spot at the mouth of the overhang, protected from the rain. "Use the fire starter from my pack. It's in the left side pouch." The direct order seemed to break him out of his paralysis. He nodded numbly and moved to her pack. Having a task, any task, was better than the crushing weight of indecision. Sharma then slid down the embankment to Rourke. He was leaning against the tree, his face gray with pain. His ankle was clearly broken, swelling rapidly. "Gunny," she said, her voice all business. "We need to get you out of this mud." Rourke looked at her, his eyes sharp with pain but also with a new, intense scrutiny. He saw no panic in her. He saw no hesitation. He saw only a cold, focused competence. He gritted his teeth and nodded. With the help of another Marine, she half-carried, half-dragged the large man up the slippery slope and into the meager shelter. Doc Chun was already there, having splinted Martinez's compound fracture as best he could. "Report," Sharma said to Chen, her tone that of an officer twice her rank. "Martinez has a compound fracture of the tibia. He's going into shock. Rourke's got a broken ankle, possibly a fibula fracture as well. Evans is showing early signs of hypothermia." Chun reported, his voice shaky but professional. "Okay," Sharma said, her mind processing the data. "Priority 1 is warmth. Diaz, how's that fire?" Diaz was struggling. The wood was soaked, and the tinder was damp. His hands were shaking from cold and adrenaline. He couldn't get a spark to catch. Sharma moved to him. "Let me see." She took the ferro rod and striker. She pulled a small, waxed cotton ball from a tiny waterproof container on her keychain. The others hadn't even known it was there. She shredded it, placed it in a small pile of the driest twigs she could find, and struck the rod. A shower of hot sparks ignited the tinder instantly. She gently blew on the fledgling flame, nurturing it. Adding progressively larger pieces of wood she stripped the wet bark from with her knife. Within minutes, a small, steady fire was crackling, pushing back the oppressive cold and darkness. The effect on morale was immediate. The small flame was a beacon of hope in the swirling chaos. Next, she turned her attention to the casualties. "Chun, keep Martinez as warm and stable as possible. Get a hot canteen of water into Evans now," she approached Rourke. "Gunny, I need to immobilize that ankle." She worked with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. She used her K-bar to cut saplings for a splint and patted it with strips of fabric cut from her own undershirt. She wrapped the splint tightly, her knots perfect and secure. Her field dressing was better than anything Chun could have managed in these conditions. Rourke watched her hands as she worked. They were steady, sure, and impossibly competent. He had seen medics with years of combat experience who weren't as efficient. With the immediate medical and shelter needs addressed, she turned to the final, most critical problem. They were lost. She pulled out her Lansatic compass. It was a simple, analog tool, but it was waterproof and reliable. While the others had been huddled in misery, she had been observing. She noted the brief moment the clouds had thinned an hour earlier, catching a glimpse of the sun's position. She had noted the direction of the water runoff down the slopes. She had even noted the type of lichen growing on the trees. They were all small pieces of a puzzle. She knelt in the dirt at the edge of the shelter, away from the fire, and began to draw a map in the mud with a stick. She triangulated their likely position based on the last known coordinates and the terrain features she could identify through the fog. Diaz came over, watching her. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a sullen, grudging respect. "What are you doing?" "Finding out where we are," she said without looking up. "We're here," she pointed to a spot on her crude map. "The storm is pushing southeast. If we follow the stream bed north, it should lead to a larger creek. That creek, according to the paper map, runs parallel to a fire road about 3 kilometers west. It's our best way out. But we can't move the casualties until this storm breaks. She had a plan. A logical, sound plan, created from nothing but observation and basic tools. She hadn't waited for orders. She hadn't panicked. She had assessed, prioritized, and acted. Rourke, leaning against the rock wall, listened to her assessment. He knew the area well. Her reasoning was flawless. In the span of an hour, Corporal Sharma had taken a catastrophic failure and turned it into a manageable survival situation. She had established a casualty collection point, secured the team, treated the wounded, and formulated an extraction plan. She hadn't raised her voice. She had simply become the center of gravity around which everyone else now orbited. The team huddled around the fire, the storm raging outside their small sanctuary. They were cold, tired, and scared, but they were no longer hopeless. They had a leader. It just wasn't the one they had started with. And as he watched her calmly checking on Martinez, her face illuminated by the flickering firelight, Gunnery Sergeant Rourke finally understood. He hadn't been trying to break a Marine. He had been trying to break a force of nature, and he had failed. The storm raged for another 6 hours. Sharma orchestrated the night with the quiet authority of a seasoned commander. She established a watch rotation, ensuring the fire never went out. She made sure Evans and Martinez drank heated water and stayed close to the warmth. She checked on Rourke's splint and her own navigation notes, refining the plan for their extraction. She did not sleep. She watched, she listened, she thought. As the first hints of dawn filtered through the canopy, the rain finally subsided to a light drizzle. The fog began to lift, revealing a battered but living world. "Time to move," Sharma announced. The finality in her tone left no room for debate. They fashioned 2 makeshift stretchers for Rourke and Martinez. It was grueling work. The terrain was a treacherous soup of mud and slick rock. The path Sharma had chosen wasn't easy, but it was survivable. She took point, her compass in hand, picking her way through the wilderness with an unerring sense of direction. Diaz, humbled and exhausted, took his position on one corner of Rourke's stretcher without a word of complaint. He put his head down and lifted, his powerful frame now being used for the team's survival, not for his own ego. The other Marines fell into line, their movements synchronized, their trust in their new, unofficial leader absolute. They found the stream, then the creek, and finally 8 agonizing hours later the fire road. They were exhausted, covered in mud, and physically spent, but they were alive and they were together. A search party from the base found them an hour after they hit the road. The debriefing back at Quantico was a somber affair. The exercise was declared a catastrophic failure for Alpha Team. They had lost their equipment, failed their mission, and sustained multiple critical injuries. According to the official report, it was a complete wash. But in the infirmary, a different story was being told. Rourke sat on his cot, his leg in a heavy cast. The course commander, a grizzled major, stood before him. "What the hell happened out there, Gunny?" the major asked. Rourke was quiet for a long moment, looking at his hands. "I made a mistake, sir. I underestimated my team. I underestimated one Marine in particular." "Corporal Sharma?" the major prompted, looking at the preliminary report. "The one who took command." "She didn't take command, sir," Rourke corrected him, his voice low. "Command gravitated to her because she was the only one who knew what to do. She saved our lives. All of us." The major raised an eyebrow. Praise from Rourke was rare currency. "Her file is unusual. A lot of black ink. Lateral transfer from an unspecified unit. Her scores are all off the charts, but she has 0 leadership billets." "Some people don't need a billet to lead, Major," Rourke said. He was thinking about the dojo, about the look in her eyes, about the way she moved. It hadn't been anger or aggression. It had been a clinical application of skill. He felt a sudden, nagging familiarity with the technique she had used. It wasn't just non-standard. It was something he had only seen briefed in classified settings, a hallmark of a very specific, very quiet community. Later that night, Unable to sleep, Rourke used the secure terminal in his office. His security clearance was high enough. He pulled up Sharma's full, unredacted file. The screen filled with lines of text that made the breath catch in his throat. Corporal Anya Sharma. Her previous unit was not just Special Activities, it was listed as Task Force 11. A Tier 1 Special Missions unit so secret that most of the military didn't even know it existed. Her record listed a string of deployments to places that were not official war zones. There were commendations with citations so heavily redacted they were meaningless, and a list of completed schools that read like a Spec Ops wish list: high-threat driving, advanced explosive ordnance disposal, combatant diver school, and at the very top of the list, the infamous SEER Level C course, the toughest survival school in the world. Then he saw it. At the bottom of her personal data. A single entry, former callsign Callie. Rourke leaned back in his chair, a cold dread mixing with a profound, earth-shaking respect. Callie, the Hindu goddess of time, creation, destruction, and power. A name whispered in certain intelligence circles, associated with a handful of solo operators who were sent to the darkest corners of the world to solve problems that couldn't be solved by armies. They were Ghost's deniable assets, and one of them was currently enrolled in his basic reconnaissance course. He now understood the takedown in the dojo. He understood her impossible calm, her methodical approach to chaos. He had been a gunnery sergeant trying to intimidate a goddess of destruction. The thought was so absurd it was almost funny. He finally understood that she wasn't here to prove she was good enough to be in his world. She had come from a world so far beyond his, it was like a star looking down on a candle. The question wasn't whether she was qualified. The question was why the hell she was here at all. The final week of the course was an entirely different world for Alpha Team. The incident in the mountains had forged them into something new. The swagger and the jokes were gone, replaced by a quiet, focused professionalism. The change was most apparent in their treatment of Sharma. No one spoke of what happened. There was no formal acknowledgement, no backslapping congratulations. The respect they now showed her was far deeper than that. It was in the small things. When they distributed ammo, her magazines were handed to her first. When they filled canteens, someone always made sure hers was full. During mission planning, when she spoke, everyone stopped and listened. Her words were sparse, but they carried the weight of proven experience. Diaz underwent the most significant transformation. The arrogant corporal was gone. In his place was a subdued, thoughtful Marine who now watched Sharma constantly, not with suspicion, but with a student's intensity. He saw how she cleaned her rifle, not just wiping it down but breaking it down to its smallest components, inspecting each piece for wear. He watched how she packed her gear, every item having a specific place for a specific reason. He was learning. One afternoon, on the firing range, he approached her while she was making a minute adjustment to her rifle's optic. "Corporal," he said, his voice quiet. He didn't call her Sharma. "The way you found our position in the storm, you didn't use any landmarks. It was all theory." Sharma paused, then looked at him. "Not theory," she said. "Data. The wind tells you the weather pattern. The water tells you the lay of the land. The trees tell you which way is north. You just have to know how to read it." She offered him her data book, which was filled with meticulous notes on windage, elevation, and atmospheric conditions. "It's all just solving a problem, Diaz." He took the book with a reverence usually reserved for a holy text. It was her way of teaching, of offering a path. It was more valuable than any apology he could have given. Rourke, his leg in a walking boot, oversaw the rest of the training from the sidelines. He never singled Sharma out again. His commands to her were crisp, professional, and tinged with a deference that only she would have noticed. During the final graduation ceremony, the major gave a long speech about the hardships they had overcome and the warrior spirit of the reconnaissance Marine. When it was Rourke's turn to hand out the certificates, he went down the line, giving each graduating Marine a firm handshake and a gruff congratulations. When he got to Sharma, he took her certificate, but he didn't hand it to her immediately. He held her gaze for a long, silent moment. The entire squad watched, holding their breath. In that look, 1,000 things were communicated. He saw the operator she had been. She saw the humbled respect in his eyes. He didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he gave her a single, sharp nod, the highest form of praise in his lexicon. "Corporal Sharma," he said, his voice clear and steady. "Welcome to the community." He pressed the certificate into her hand. It was an acceptance, an anointing. The course was over. The others were celebrating, heading into town for a well-deserved night of revelry. But Sharma was not with them. The pre-dawn light was a pale, gray wash over the silent base. The air was cool and clean. Sharma was alone in the empty armory, the only light coming from a small utility lamp clamped to a weapon rack. She had her rifle broken down on a cleaning mat. The scent of solvent and gun oil filled the small space. She worked with a focused, meditative grace. Each pin, each spring, each surface of the bolt carrier group was wiped clean and inspected with an expert's touch. This was her ritual, her church. The weapon was not a symbol of violence to her. It was an instrument of order, a tool that, in her hands, could impose calm on a chaotic world. It was an extension of her own focused will. She reassembled the rifle with fluid, practiced motions, the clicks of the metal components seating into place the only sound in the quiet armory. She worked the charging handle, did a function check, and then gently placed the weapon on the rack. The work was done. A shadow fell across the doorway. She didn't startle. She had heard him coming from 50 yards away. Gunnery Sergeant Rourke stood there, leaning on a cane, his silhouette framed by the nascent dawn. He didn't enter. He didn't speak. He looked at her, then at the rifle, then back at her. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a battered, stainless steel thermos. He walked over to a nearby crate, placed the thermos on it, and turned to leave. "Gunny." Sharma's voice was quiet, but it stopped him at the door. He turned back to face her. "Thank you," she said. Rourke just nodded again. That same sharp, respectful gesture from graduation. "Don't mention it, Callie," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He turned and walked away, his footsteps receding into the growing light. Sharma stood motionless for a long moment. He knew. Of course, he knew. She walked over to the crate and picked up the thermos. It was warm. She unscrewed the cap and poured some of the contents, strong black coffee, into the cup. The steam rose, carrying the rich aroma into the cool morning air. She took a sip, the warmth spreading through her chest. Outside, the sun was finally breaking over the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty parade ground. A new day was beginning. The test was over. The respect was earned. And for the first time in a long time, Anya Sharma felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be.